We got Eagles. We've got NFL news and notes. John McMullen, national NFL columnist, FanRag Sports NFL, 97.3 ESPN.com, covers the Eagles at JF McMullen on Twitter. He joins us now and every day at this time with a look at the Eagles in the NFL. John, is today the final day of this group of OTAs?
No, this is 3 days again, and then next week it'll start up on Monday. But we don't have access as media people again until next Monday, so it would have been nice if we had access today versus yesterday.
Yeah.
Much nicer day. But those are some of the hurdles you have to overcome. And I wrote today on 973ESPN.com. I think that's part of the reason why Doug Peterson was a little surlier than usual yesterday. A lot of things sort of came together with the bad weather, the poor play on the field, and I think he showed a little part of his personality that he doesn't normally show. And I think that's a good thing.
It's funny because I was playing golf today with Scott Grayson, and the first thing he said was, what do you think about what the Eagles have done this offseason? And I kind of answered back and forth, and he said, well, to him, he says, well, I think it comes down to Doug. He's got to do a better job, basically. And I said, well, he didn't have a lot to work with last year. That shouldn't be the excuse this year, at least on the offensive side of the ball. We shouldn't be saying, well, they really don't have any receivers and they can't run the ball. I think that perception has changed, and a lot of that now, I guess, will change our perception of Doug.
Yeah, and it should. You expect improvement from the head coach. He was a first-year guy. I think everybody, to a certain degree, first-time head coaches, no matter where they are, it's a job you kind of learn on the fly, and you're going to make mistakes. I think people who assumed that he wasn't going to make mistakes were a little pie in the sky. It's just the nature of the position. You can't really have experience at it until you are actually doing it. And until you're actually doing it, you don't know everything it encompasses. So it's natural to have some hiccups along the way. He certainly did. By no means do I think he was a failure as a rookie head coach, but the expectations will be raised. And there's no question offensively, they've improved, at least on paper. So with that improvement comes those added expectations.
John, a lot of times we talk about the players making a big jump from year one to year two. Same for head football coach?
Yeah, it should be for the same reason. You constantly talk to coaches. Part of it is, and this is people you can use in their everyday lives if they get new jobs. You're nervous at the beginning, and as you start to feel more comfortable and you start to understand what's expected of you, you start doing better. That's sort of what happens with second-year players. It's a whirlwind when you're drafted. You come in, you sign, you meet all these new players. You're in a new city. These are very young people, and I think people tend to forget that there's off-the-field issues. It could come down to being homesick, something as simple as that for a very young person. So as you get more comfortable in your surroundings, you get better. And that's the same for the head coach. He's more comfortable. He understands what to expect more. And he should improve.
You say he shows a different side. John McMullen writes at 97.3 ESPN.com. Do you see a guy that has more what is the different side? Is it that he has more fire, that he has more of a stern voice? What is this side that you're seeing?
Well, he got angry yesterday, and he got angry for it. We joked about it a little bit yesterday. He scolded the reporters, but he was also angry and yelling on the field. Fletcher Cox was there after missing a week. He jumped off sides on the first 11-on-11 play. There were 3 or 4 times the defensive line jumped off sides. It was a very sloppy practice. The quarterbacks were not good. He was not happy, and he showed it. And I think by and large, we look at Doug, and he is normally a very likable guy. He just is. But he showed a little different side to him. He showed a little bit of an edge, and he showed, look, I'm the guy in charge. I'm the guy running this thing.
What do you think what do you think that he had the toughest time making adjustments with last year?
Well, I mean, on field, I think it's the problem that every young coach goes through, and that is the fact that I think the NFL is backwards in a way. I think the most successful coaches, and it starts with Bill Belichick, are CEO coaches, and by that I mean guys who don't call plays. They delegate, and they're able on game day to be a manager of the whole team. But when you're a first-time coach, it's bizarre. It's, as I said, it's almost backward in the NFL because it doesn't matter who it is, offense, defense. When you get a head coaching job, you call the plays. And it's only after you have some success that guys feel comfortable enough to take their foot off the gas and, as I said, start delegating. To me, the opposite should be true. You should be delegating earlier because the job is so big, it's so enormous. You would think you would want less on your plate when you're doing it for the first time. That, to me, makes common sense. But Tom Coughlin talked about it a couple of years ago when I spoke to him, and he said, because he was another very successful CEO-type coach, but at first he called plays, and he said, you naturally have to set the tone in the building for the entire program. So you have to do it at first, and then you can ease off from there. So that kind of explains why it's done the way it's done. But I think every coach struggles with time management because there's so much going on when you're calling plays. You're thinking 2 plays ahead, sometimes 3 plays ahead. What are we going to run here? And you got 40 seconds to do it. And then you see those things like a bad challenge call, a missed timeout, poor clock management. But that's not only Doug Peterson. It happens all over the league.
No doubt about it. And you wrote about this at FanRag Sports NFL about how the NFL should start embracing CEO coaches. How many of them exist? I mean, there's a lot of teams or a lot of guys who get that role that don't want to give up the power that they work so hard to achieve.
Yeah, there's a lot. There's very few, and ego has a lot to do with it. And it's not necessarily just young coaches. You see Sean McVay, the youngest coach in NFL history, at 31 years old, going into Los Angeles. He's going to call the plays. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. Jay Gruden was one of those CEO coaches, delegated it down to Sean McVay. Now he's taking it back. So I think it's very difficult for coaches to trust their coordinators at times. And it's interesting because, as I wrote, as you mentioned, at FanRag Sports, everyone calls the NFL a copycat league, but no one copies the best team. It's bizarre to me.
That's a good point. Yeah, because really, Belichick seems like a guy that everybody would be trying to figure out and follow. We talk about, but we look at like in the NBA. How to build teams. We know that debate, but no one seems to be able to follow what the Spurs do. Like, that's a team that kind of exists on their own, and no one says, let's follow that Spurs model because it's very hard to do because you can't find the coach.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and that's what I said. Maybe you can't copy Bill Belichick because he is that much better than everybody else. But I think it would be interesting if someone tried to at least set up the system. And then you would know for sure, well, maybe it is the guy at the top that is making the difference. But as we see all over the league, it's very rare. And when you do have, for instance, in Dallas, Jason Garrett's a CEO coach, but that's because it was taken away from him by the owner, and basically said, if you want to continue coaching this team, you can't call the plays. He didn't want to do it. He was forced to do it. And even that, in that instance, in that example, it worked out. The Cowboys have become a much better team. And I just don't understand why other organizations can't figure that part of it out.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. So Doug Peterson really in year 2 is, in a spot where, the first year, it's your first year, but I think in this second year is probably going to be, even if he thought he took some bullets last year in some heat, he's going to get a lot more in year 2, don't you think?
Yeah, he is, because as I said, the expectations are raised, and it figures to be a difficult division.
But specifically on his side specifically, John, on his side of the ball, where they went and got him, you got 2 receivers, you got your running back, the offensive line's intact. I think the expectations on the offensive side of the ball, I don't know about defense, we can get into that, but I think on the offensive side of the ball, the expectations are a lot greater, and this was a team last year that was 7-9, and a couple of games could have gone in a different direction had they had anybody that could catch the damn ball.
Yeah, I would argue, really, they got 4 new receivers if you add the rookies into the equation, and they got 2 new running backs if you add Donnell Pumphrey into the equation, along with LeGarrette Blount. So they've completely revamped the skill positions, and as I said, on paper they're much better. And then you add in the fact that Carson Wentz enters his second year, so he should be much more comfortable without that whirlwind of being the second overall pick. He's got an entire offseason where he knows he's the guy. He's preparing to be the starter for the season. So, yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. The expectations are raised. But I would even say on the defensive side of the ball, because even though that's Jim Schwartz's domain, and we all know Doug lets Jim do what he wants, the bottom line is he's the head coach, Doug Peterson. And if that side of the ball falters, he's going to get blamed for that as well. So, there's higher expectations in a difficult division, because Dallas, although I don't think they're going to be a 13-win team again, they're going to be a very good team. The Giants were a playoff team, and I think even the Washington Redskins are better than people think they are. So it's a tough environment, and the Eagles need to improve on 7-9. But I've argued in the past they could finish 7-9 and be a better football team, but that's not going to go over too well.
They do have a very difficult schedule this year. I don't know how much people want to hear that, but the schedule for all the NFC East teams are difficult. They've got to play the AFC West and the NFC West, so they've got everybody plays the same schedule in that NFC East. But all 4 teams in the NFC East, I think the strength of schedule was every one of them was ranked in the top 10.
Yeah, well, you look at the AFC West specifically, that is one of the best divisions in football, arguably the best, because you have Denver, who's probably going to be better and back to towards being a double-digit win team, and then you have 2 teams who made the playoffs last year, Oakland and Kansas City, and figure to be very good again. So that's tough. That's tough sledding to be in that division. But as you said, that's something everybody's got to go through. So I don't look at the schedule and try to make excuses from that standpoint. It's just, how good are you going to be? Every coach will tell you in this league, to accomplish your goal, which is ultimately, obviously, the Super Bowl, the first thing you got to do is be successful in your division. So it starts there. And the Eagles have to be successful to a good degree in those 6 division games.
John, let's look at some NFL stuff that is hitting the wire here. One of which, very interesting, on Tony Romo. Report out there that most teams, this is from Bleacher Report's Mike Freeman, most teams think Tony Romo, quote, will be back to play again sooner than later. He says he spoke to several front office executives who said if their starting quarterback gets hurt, Romo will be the first call they made. So is CBS going to be thrilled to hear that the guy they put into the number 1 seat is already, the rumors are starting that he could be going back sooner than later?
No, I don't think so from CBS's standpoint, because those rumors started the day he signed the contract. I mean, that was everyone knows, and not picking on Mike at all, but everyone knows if somebody gets hurt, the first phone call everybody's making is to Tony Romo, because people think he could still play and still play at a relatively high level. The issues with him have always been, can he stay on the field? And that is a concern, and ultimately I think the reason why he left for TV. But then you go down to Dallas, and they haven't removed his locker. So I think the assumption there is that if something happens to Dak Prescott, well, they're not going to move forward with Kellen Moore or anything like that. Tony's going to come back. And I've said from day one, I think Tony would go back to the Dallas Cowboys. But I do not think he will be returning to any other team. And the reason for that is he had a chance to play for the Houston Texans, who would have been a legitimate Super Bowl contender. So he would have not found a better spot than Houston. So to me, that clearly indicates if he's coming back, it's only for the Cowboys.
That would be very interesting, though, if there was an injury and somebody called, and that team, is in a situation where they're winning a lot of football games. I find that would be very humorous to see CBS take their first chair, put them in it, and then 6 games in a year, you get a 5-1 team, lose their quarterback, and they call Tony Romo, and they're back begging to Phil Simms to come back to the booth.
Well, and it's interesting. I don't think anyone has seen the contract to date, because that's when I wrote about it when it first happened. I would think because they put him in the first chair, which was a strange move in the first place, they would have had to have gotten some guarantee from Tony that he's not going to take the first job. He's not going to take the first phone call, and he's only going to return in an extreme situation. That's another reason why I point towards probably the only way he would come back is if Dak Prescott got hurt and the Cowboys needed him.
Hey, John, you wrote about it at FanRag Sports NFL in regards to Oakland. There's another team that I find kind of interesting, because this is the first time in a long time they're going into a season that they're going to have some expectations, but already entering the year, you got Derek Carr with the training, with the extension talk. I find that team to be kind of an interesting team to keep an eye on.
Yeah, they are. I mean, the lame duck status alone, because we're all waiting to see how bad does that get. I think it'll be fine as long as they win football games. And obviously there were 12-14 last year, and people project them to be a legitimate contender again. They have a lot of talent. But we all know how quickly things can turn in this league with 1 or 2 key injuries. Then all of a sudden, if you have the expectations of 12, 13 wins and it becomes an 8-win team, well, you can imagine how ugly things could get in Oakland very, very quickly with that team set to move to Las Vegas. But as far as Derek and the contract, I mean, that'll get done. The Raiders have the franchise tag in their back pocket. I think it all comes down to timing. If he wants to play out this year, for instance,
right,
and the Raiders do win the Super Bowl and make that run, all of a sudden he could be the top-paid quarterback in the NFL. But if he wants to sign earlier, he can get a whole heck of a lot of money, but he's not going to be in that range. So I think it all depends on what Derek wants to do.
Hey, Brock Osweiler going to start in Cleveland?
It's a possibility. He got hurt today, but I think he's okay. I haven't gotten complete confirmation of that, but he went down at OTAs, but he was seen on the sideline, so he should be fine. But if you think about their situation, Cody Kessler is the starter, and DeShone Kizer is the backup, who's a second-round pick. So that's not exactly Brian Sipe and Bernie Kosar. I mean, he could most certainly win that job, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. Ultimately, they're trying to get a bridge to Kizer and hope he develops into a long-term starter. I think that's a possibility. I like him as a prospect. I like him very much, but it's going to take a while. And Cody Kessler is just not very good. So it's who's the lesser of two evils, Brock Osweiler or Cody Kessler? I think that's ultimately what the decision's going to have to be for Hugh Jackson.
A lot of good football talk to continue on throughout this next couple of weeks here as the OTAs continue, which will take us to training camp which isn't all that far off, football fans. And we'll get more NFL tomorrow on the show. John McMullen will join us with the latest on the Eagles as they continue. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They have 4 more of these OTA days left. So should be some good stuff still to come at 97.3ESPN.com. Follow John on Twitter at JFMcMullen. John, thanks, pal.
Hey, thank you, Mike.